Greetings and welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube and you're new to our show and you want to learn more about what we do here, head over to officehours.global. Our first hour, we answer your questions on media and virtual events. And on the second hour, we tend to spend a little bit more time on, and today we'll be talking with Jon Snyder on getting ready for your big promotion and what it takes to do that. And you know what? I think it's time. Alex, did you say you have an announcement to make?
Yeah, just a quick announcement. We on Fridays we've been having these kind of open Zoom ISO testing ground. So it's Friday at 3 to 6, and we need more time. So we're opening it up. There's a lot going on, and we think that we're pretty excited about a lot of things we're working on with Zoom ISO. So we are opening that up from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock every day. So if you have Zoom ISO needs, just know that you can come in between 1 and 3. And if you come in from 1 and 3, know that there's lots of people using Zoom ISO or potentially. So just keep that in mind as you talk, because you'll see a bunch of recording things popping up in the middle of the day. But 1 to 3 each day. We kind of don't want it to be an open season, people just turning it on all the time. But if you want to test things that you're working on with Zoom ISO, we wanted to give everybody an opportunity to do that. So 1 to 3 every day, 7 days a week, you can do Zoom ISO tests. There you go.
Exciting. Well, it sounds like it's also time for us to head into the show. And to our producers, feel free to submit your questions. We've got a great panel for you today. And let's dive into those questions, Bill.
Absolutely, Liberty. Good morning. Our first one today comes from Rick Combs in Columbia, Tennessee. He says, is it possible to record a video using the Zoom record feature? I need to record a session using my ATEM Mini and cameras that I have set up in my home studio. There will be no other participants except myself.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, sure, you can do that. It's not necessarily the best way. I'm not sure what compression they use. I'm sure Alex will tell us, but the other thing is you can always use an ATEM ISO or an ATEM Extreme, and it accomplishes the same thing, or just a dedicated recording device.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, it depends on what I don't know. You could probably use OBS if you were on a PC, but also remember that QuickTime will just do a movie recording. So you can set up your ATEM as the input to QuickTime, set up movie recording, and then really set a much higher quality record than what you're going to get from Zoom. But Zoom will work as well. You just set to record the session, and people have used that over the last couple years.
And Bill.
I have been surprised by it lately for the Final Cut things that I've been doing on Fridays at noon. The last two, I decided to just go ahead and hit Zoom record and see what happened. And I was actually shocked at what it gave me back. It gave me a little folder with a bunch of things, including 3 video. And it looked like it took the main screen, and my computer screen was actually clear and accurate, because the interface at Final Cut has a lot of little fiddly details on it. And the capture that Zoom had done was clear enough for me to put that into a tutorial later. So I was actually very impressed. The only thing I didn't like about it, you have a little tiny Picon on one side of you that they feed back as if I guess that's the main camera view coming back. And that was kind of useless because it was so small that even blowing it up if I wanted to cut away didn't work. But the main capture worked really, really well. So I was shocked.
Let's see what Blue has to say.
So +1 to what everybody has said so far. And just a quick heads up. Zoom does something weird if you're the only person in the meeting, if somebody else joined you first. So if you have a remote person who joins you to talk about the thing that you're about to record and then they leave, even if you have a licensed account, you only have 40 minutes before Zoom says this room is inactive and shuts it down. So if you're planning on doing long form, just keep that in mind.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Alexander Knight in Vancouver, British Columbia. He says, has anyone tried the different autofocus features on Lumix cameras? I know Sony is the gold standard. I'm currently using the grid option, which locks on pretty well when I tap my face. I tried face tracking, but it messed with the bokeh. Unclear as to why.
Alex?
So, Alec, when you say it messed with the bokeh, you meant that the background gets sharp. Do you go out of focus?
Yeah, well, you can see, so I have over my shoulder here, I've got a microphone that's slightly out of focus. And I noticed when I switched it to the face detection, that microphone became really sharp, and this microphone right in front of my face became really blurry. My face was actually in focus. I just thought it was weird that the depth of field changed, and this microphone in front of me became out of focus.
Interesting. I mean, it could be where your center of where it's deciding your center of focus is, because there's a part of the interesting thing about focus in general is that there really is an infinite point in which you're in focus, but depending on your aperture and your sensor size and your focal length, you may end up that cone that goes from being in focus to out of focus can be very long, and if it's long, then you can have that's what your depth of field is how long, how skinny that cone is going from in focus and out of focus to a point where it gets beyond a pixel, right? And so the issue there is that if you it may have decided that your focus point is further back, you're still in focus, but your front mic might not be as in focus because it's decided your center of focus is a little bit further back. You may be having enough depth of field that it puts normally you focus it and your mic is in focus and you're in focus. That probably means your focus point is somewhere between your mic and your head. So when it pushes it further back and knocks one out and brings the other one back in, it does seem odd that it would do it to something so far back, but that might be the case.
And I'm curious, what is the grid option when you say that? You mean, do you just put the grid on your camera and then it's...
Yeah, so there's, I can't remember how large the grid is, but it's basically a segment of the pixels on the screen. And within that defined space, basically, you can say my face lives inside this box, and it will try to keep focus in that area.
Okay, copy that. Bill?
And if you want to have a lovely weekend's reading, look up the term circle of confusion. It will take you the entire reading week or weekend to get through all of that because it is very scientific, but it is the optics, the physics of the optics of blurriness and focus, and it's a deep subject.
Okay, next question.
Next question is from Michael Andreas in Olathe, Kansas. He's saying Zoom offers white boards, but that feature seems to be turned off in after hours. Could that feature be turned on to facilitate technical help discussions?
Oh, that's a good idea. Alex?
It was turned on for the meetings, but not turned on at the admin level. So I've turned it on an admin level, so now it should work. If it doesn't, let us know. so there was no reason for it. I thought it was on all the time. And so until you brought it up. So good. I'm glad you brought it up, but it should be fixed now.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas says, what are the options for watching the NASA Artemis launch for most incisive, most humorous, most sensational coverage and so forth?
We need Vienna back. Mitchell.
Well, Paul, I think the most incisive, humorous, and sensational coverage would come if you were in the capsule and we had a view of you during the launch. That would be the most interesting spot.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. Chris says, Lowepro Fastpack Pro versus Manfrotto Manhattan camera backpack for a full-frame Panasonic camera and lenses and batteries. Thoughts on which would hold up better for backcountry photo shoots?
Alex?
I know you picked two of them, but I'm going to pick one more for you. I've spent a lot of time with a lot of bags, and I've kind of centralized around the Tactical 511 Rush 24 with inserts. So then I put the inserts inside of those, and I design them as I like them. It's a pretty big bag. It's extremely hardy, and it has webbing, so that you can put a lot of things on the outside, tons of pockets that you can kind of sort things out. And I found as an all-around bag, it worked better than most of the photo bags. I could then not use it as a photo bag if I wanted to. And it also doesn't necessarily advertise that I have a bunch of photography tools inside of it.
Bill?
So my favorite backpack turned out to be a Case Logic for a camera, and that was because they designed it with a little top opening that I could reach in when I was shooting a lot of DSLR stuff and reach in for it. That's not why I'm recommending it. What changed my life about it was the interior was not black or dark. It was instead a bright yellow, which changed my life in terms of being able to find things in the places I found myself using my camera. If I was outdoors, to open that up and be able to see all the small accessories more clearly was just a revelation. So I always open a backpack and look inside. I understand that some of them are set up better or worse for you, and those two may be particularly good, but if neither one of them had that kind of contrasty interior, I would probably keep looking for something else because that just was a life changer for me.
The Lowepro has that has been a fave, just the compartments, but then also traveling through the airport. Similarly to just, especially with now the restrictions and people not wanting their luggage to get lost. So I understand it's backpacking through, but that's like the closest. I'm like, oh yeah, the Lowepro works really well. And then Mickey also says in the chat, between the two brands, I like Lowepro a lot more for bags. Next question.
Jon Snyder in Reno, Nevada says, during Zoom ISO hours, are the cameras actually being recorded, or is that just a cautionary message?
Alex?
It means that an external system has access to the video feeds. So it doesn't, I mean, the reality is anybody could record any of these things at any given time. So we have to kind of be accountable for that. But what that message specifically means is that somebody else outside of the system has made a request via the API or, to grab onto it.
Next question.
Eduardo Augustine in Panama says, Alex, Lindsay, your videos look amazing. Did you change the lighting? Can you share what changes you have done with your setup currently?
Why, thank you.
Perfect time for a lap.
Thank you so much. No. So what happened was, of course, is that I was, something was referred to from the last couple of days, and I've been moving things around. This is a long story, but I'll try to make it short. I was having trouble with my back because the way I was sitting. And so I changed the way I was sitting. And then I noticed the last couple of days that I was out of focus. And I was like, and I thought that I was in focus, but in this little window, I was not. And so then, of course, that you start pulling at a thread on the sweater. And before I knew it, I had kind of pulled things around. So I had realized that I was also too close. I wasn't really fitting into the Fenwick frame. So I opened up the camera a little bit, which then showed some shadows, which I'm still fighting over here. So then I changed the position of some of the lights that I have in front of me. I also, Renee Ritchie had mentioned that I looked a little like I had a little too much green in the last Mac break. So I backed off that a little bit. So anyway, so there was a bunch of moving parts. I'm glad somebody noticed. I thought that it wasn't that big of a deal, but evidently it looks better. So anyway, but those were the adjustments I made over the weekend, and they seem to be working pretty well. A bunch of things changed in my room, and so my LUT that I had before hasn't worked for a couple months, and I keep on going, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to redo the LUT, and I haven't done that yet, but I'm working on it. So anyway, so this is as close as I've gotten so far.
It looks great.
Thanks.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Greg Gibson in Washington, D.C. Video tripods is his topic. Ground spreader or mid-level spreader, and why?
Alex?
I have to admit, we use both of them, and there's nothing particularly wrong with one or the other. I don't like mid spreaders. I like ground spreaders. so I like them on the ground. I don't like stuff in between. And a lot of it has to do with, we tend to attach a lot of things to the tripod. And so the mid spreaders get in the way. So that's my 2 cents.
And Bill?
Depends on what you're shooting. Ground spreaders are my preference, but it requires a flat floor. Obviously, if you need to be outside shooting, then that same ground spreader, which is going to be really flat to the floor, if it's on a rock or something like that, is going to really mess up the geometry of your tripod. And so that case, you go to a mid-level spreader. For me, the other thing that's important as a video as opposed to a still photography tripod, torsional rigidity is very important, because if you're going to be doing smooth pans particularly, you don't want the whole tripod to be variable in terms of its torsional rigidity, I guess, for lack of a better way to describe it. You don't, the tripod head, which theoretically you spent a lot of money on to make it a good one, does its damping, you don't want the legs fighting that. You want the legs to be as stable as possible. So the entire base, if you can, I've often used both just to try to get the maximum amount of stability out of that tripod so that the camera and the head can do their job effectively.
And Mitchell.
As usual, Bill is very eloquent and answers exactly the way you should use it. On my Sackler, which is right there, it's got a adjustable spreader, so it really isn't an issue of whether you're buying one or the other. It can do both or none. You can take the spreader out if you have an uneven surface and you have to stagger the legs on a uneven surface. Sometimes the spreader would get in the way. So agree with Bill. He's on the money.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Alexander Knight in Vancouver, British Columbia. I picked up a Smallrig iPhone camera cage with a handle grip attachment. Is there a strap I can get that attaches to a 1/4 20?
Alex?
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that Smallrig doesn't make one, but Camvate, who makes rigs as well for these cameras, has a 1/4-20, and it's got a 1/4-20 strap as well as a 1/4-20 mount. So you can just put it in, and it's got a little eyelet for any kind of strap that you may want to use after that.
And Mitchell.
Yeah, this is a small rig on my Sony EV-E10, and it does, in addition to putting a handle, which is nice, it has plenty of 1/4-20s on the side for mounting it. So the answer is yes.
Oh yeah. But But I think the question was what do you put into those 1/4-20s? Do you have any straps for those?
I do not, because I have this nice big handle to grab hold of. So there's space for it right there.
Let's see if Bill has the answer to the straps.
Well, I'm not sure it's the answer, but let me tell you what I do. Particularly if I'm shooting stills, I have who is the manufacturer? I have a strap, and the key thing to the strap is obviously it mounts on the body of a camera, whether it's a video or still camera, through those little small fold over and send through the de-fitting things. But then about 3 inches away, it has a small collapsible fitting that you can squeeze and pull it out, and it has the same fitting on the other side. So you can snap in a long strap, but what I find absolutely useful all the time is that they've set these up to be just long enough. If you snap the two together, you get a really short strap at your camera. And I find that if I put my hand through that and twist the camera once, my hand fits on the side, and I have both a secure strap and the ability to shoot with the camera handheld really easily. So I shoot in that mode probably 80% of the time if I'm doing run and gun type either photography or video, because that extra strap around this wrist that's attached to the camera and the camera still fits beautifully in my hand just means that if something happens, the camera's not going to go flying. I love those kind of straps. So look for that. Look for camera straps that have that little detachment fitting about 6 inches from the body of the camera.
Now, Alexander, feel free to jump in for a moment, because you also said this is for your iPhone. So just I'm trying to think through having the strap, just the purpose of what you're thinking about.
I think that to get to go back to the question, to get a 1/4-20 onto with a strap, Camvate is probably CAMVATE is probably the right.
I got it. And I just bought. I'm glad I asked a question about a product that was inexpensive. This show's going to get very expensive for me.
But that's Camvate. You have to let us know, Alex, how that works. You got the Camvate mount or strap?
Yeah, the little. It's like $8 or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Welcome to office hours in terms of expense.
Right. And Stefan wanted to add to the gumbo this morning.
Yeah, okay. This one's gonna get a little bit more expensive. Peak Design has already also nice ones which are detachable, and they deliver it with a 1/4-20 as well.
Perfect. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Stefan Fischer, Würzburg, Germany. What individual devices are used to do Unity comms when on the floor of IBC? Personal iPhone or any other thing?
Go ahead, Alex.
I don't know what the IBC team is planning to do. Typically, we would use something like a personal iPhone. The only challenge that you have is whether you end up with solid. You have to make sure that you have actually a solid connection. So and the other thing to remember is to put your phone on Do Not Disturb, so that when you get a phone call, oftentimes it will require restarting Unity.
Next question.
Liberty White in Atlanta, Georgia. I wonder who that is. What topics would you like to see covered in the coming months on Mondays? Typically, we cover the business of media and virtual events.
And I probably should have prefaced a little bit, because I typically try to plan as far out as possible. And we're actually even planning so far as October and November. So I figured that this would be a great opportunity for the panel, but also the producers, to share what they're looking for, and just from Mondays, because it is a little bit different than going all in technically. So we really try to have some business elements, some marketing, some mental health, and just bringing all that together, because the end of the year is going to come by so quickly, and we want to get in front of people as quickly as possible. Jon?
I'm always really interested when the conversation leads into financial planning or budgeting, and seeing maybe the difference between approaching a small event versus a medium or larger event. I think the other thing that might really help is how to hire people, and when you want to hire versus use contractors, and what some of those benefits and negatives are.
That's a good one. Alex?
I think a good state of events might be a good Monday of just talking about where we are with events. I mean, a lot of things are moving. I think that what we've seen so far is that virtual events keep on kind of plugging through a lot more physical events, and most people are still finding hybrid events pretty painful. But I think that talking about what the options are and where things are going, and I think that doing it after IBC might be a really useful time to do that.
Sounds good. Mitchell?
Love to see a thing on bid documents or ways to manage them, and also documentation that allows you legally to do certain things. Some of those things tend to slide through the cracks when you're in the throes of putting a production together. It's good to have that business part taken care of.
Great point. I'm in the midst of a bunch of RFPs. So yes, I think I can pull some folks together to just help in that process. Alex?
Yeah, and I think that to build on what Mitch just talked about is just pitch decks. What does a good deck do, and how does it work?
Like that, all of that. Awesome. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Stefan Fischer here on the panel from Würzburg, Germany, and he asks, what will be the way to get the AV signal from IBS to the cutting room in Belfast, Northern Ireland?
Stefan.
Yeah, and I just stepped in to correct the typo. It should be IBC, of course.
Okay, thank you. Alex?
And I think some of this is covered, I think, last week in the IBC kind of prep, or 2 weeks before, so 2 Fridays ago. But it's the live views. So we have 2 live views. One live view is coming from Accidental Theater, and the other one is being lent to us actually by LiveView to support the cause. So we have 2 live views that are going to be sending them back.
And just a quick note to our producers, we are plowing through your questions this morning. So this is a great time to go ahead and any of those burning questions, no question is too small or too complicated, because our panel will always go back and find.
Or we'll start getting very philosophical. We'll start waxing on. That's what, If you want that, there you go.
The next question comes from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. I'm going to be managing volunteer actors in 1860 period costumes outside for a performance with the heat, and I'm worried about them. Other than ice packs under costumes between performances, any suggestions for low noise cooling?
Go ahead, Alex.
I don't know if it's low noise, but you can run. So we get industrial for this kind of thing. Usually there's a tent that the actors or for us, it's sometimes actors, but mostly talent. There's a tent that they can go to. You need an enclosed space so that you can kind of control it. Then we have and it might be just a little ways away from their performance. And then it's basically, we have a big AC units. Now these have, they'll blow a lot of air really quickly. You'll usually see them, they've got like 2 vents coming out, 2 exhausts, and they have a big vent out. And they can be relatively quiet. They're not super quiet, but they will push a lot of air into that tent. And it just gives the actors somewhere to get a little bit of a rest if they need to. It is important, especially in the kind of things that people wore in the 1860s. It is especially if they're wearing. Usually, when you say 1860, I start thinking about military outfits, and those are really hot. I don't know how they did it when they did it. So definitely think about getting some tents where they can go in and just cool off. Make sure that there's refreshments. One of the big problems is that people don't notice how much fluids they're losing just in sweat. So you want to make sure that there's lots of liquids. There are liquids with electrolytes. So that's typically something like Gatorade or Pedialyte. But you want to make sure that people are able to not only get the water is fine and it's good for short periods of time, but you actually need to replace the electrolytes as well. So just kind of think through that process as you want to take care of people there to make sure that they don't faint. So, which we've had happen at things when you're not paying attention. You do want to walk around also with things that they can do it. And it turns out, I don't know, I mean, it seems to help is that cold packs on your neck behind your collar seem to make a big difference in at least how you feel. I don't know if it cools down your whole body, but for whatever reason, it tends to make a big difference. When the other thing that we did in Cambodia was the scarf. We wear lot of scarves. And so, but wetting those down and wearing them in there also makes a difference there. So some things to kind of think about in that area. And I hope you're doing something cool with a period piece. The 18 that period of time is a fun time to do reenactments.
And Bill?
Everything just said, but having spent a good chunk of my career in Arizona, heat was always a significant issue. And I'm of the mind, I like the idea of anything cold, particularly water packs or ice packs or something like that, on pulse points really does help the body keep relatively cool, keeps your blood a little bit cooler, and that helps. I will say that I learned early as a teenager in Arizona that the worst I ever felt was when I had to work on something outside in the summer and would constantly take breaks to go inside in the air conditioning. The body regulation stress of going from hot to cold to hot to cold wiped me out. And at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I wasn't good for anything on those days. I tried to work on the car outside with, 10 breaks in between to cool down. Instead of that, I tended to use more moderate cooling and to try to keep in the shade and with a fan on me and not have my body try to re-regulate itself back and forth into those things. Everybody's going to be different, but that was my experience. Cycling through hot and cold was the worst that I experienced.
And just pulling in from the comments, Mickey mentions have paramedics prepared to treat dehydration and heat stroke, most definitely. And Chris also shares an update. Chris Widener, tent and portable AC is all set up, and water and electrolyte mixes with flavors is on my checklist. And Stefan?
Yeah, and don't forget, if you drink something cool when it's hot outside, your body has to heat up that cool drink. So if you drink something cool, the body produces extra amount of heat. If you drink something what is 25 degrees or 20 degrees or something like that, or even a hot tea, it's much better for the body than something cold. Even it sounds kind of contradictory.
Next question.
David Brady in New York City comes to us next. He says, live streaming food truck, looking for an auto switching solution for multiple cameras. I know Mevo has a multicam solution. Does anyone know if the YOLO device has an autopilot move? That sounds cool. Live stream food truck.
It really does, David. I might have to bring you in on a Monday to talk about that.
Television show.
Right. Alex?
I think that one of the things I think about there is what's going to drive the auto cut. So is it doing it based on volume? Is it doing it based on time? Is it doing what causes the decision process? I actually think that if I was going to do this, I would probably still do it with an ATEM Mini or something like that, where I can use something like Isadora and Mix Effect, or I would use or write straight to it to basically build something into it. We did experiments. We never used it in a show, so we were kind of fiddling with it, which was using the Arduino just to take volume from different mics and then just auto cut. Just auto cut based on whichever one. It's basically like the auto feature that you'd see in Zoom or Hangouts, but it would be just driving a switcher, and it worked pretty well. A little flickery, so we just were like, we need to add some more work to it, and we just never did. But it seemed to be the start of something that would have been useful.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, between the Mix Effects Pro and then the macro settings on the Blackmagic, the Mix Effects actually already has the audio, so whatever the loudest source will become the live program feed. And then with the macro, you can set up switching through however many cameras in the order that you want, and then loop that macro. And it'll just continuously run for you.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Kyle Hammond in Chicago, Illinois. What are your small on-camera monitor recommendations for a Blackmagic 6K Pro?
Go ahead, Alex.
The Blackmagic monitors. So there's lots of little, either 5 or 7 inch monitors that are really great. I don't think I have one within reach, but they work really, really well. They've got scopes. They've got a lot of different recording options. The 12K one or 12G monitor is amazing.
Rachel?
I use this Andy Cine 4K. It's very, very bright if you need it to get that if you're outside. 7-inch built-in scopes, like Alex says, is good. And the folks at Feel Good make a very, very similar and suspiciously similar monitor. And all of these can be purchased for about $160 on B&H when they're on sale.
Thank you. And Bill.
So on the less expensive ones, I use Lilliput because they usually have HDMI in and out, and that's really convenient in a workflow if you want to do monitoring on camera and also send something to a monitoring station for front of house or something. The other ones I've consistently had really good results with were Marshall monitors, and they tend to be a little more expensive, but they've been around for a long time. They really know what they're doing, and they have a variety of models as well. So they're a little on the pricey side, but both of those are good brands.
And then two more from the chat from Mickey McAchore is TV Logic and Bon. Next question.
Thanks. Moving on to Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas. What do you know about Markdown language versus HTML coding? What tools are best for Markdown? For example, Obsidian for Mac and PC.
Go ahead, John.
I very occasionally have an opportunity to use HTML. And one of the big differences is Markdown's a way to have an approximation of formatting text while keeping the plain text format. It's easier to read and compose than HTML. A lot of tools are now starting to integrate Markdown, especially developer tools. Even Microsoft SharePoint has the ability to use Markdown. But the tools I personally use, it really depends on your other uses than just keeping the Markdown format. So I like to use one called Dillinger.io. It's an online tool you can use, or you can host it internally that's open source. You can have multiple documents there and see a preview of it. I use one called Mao from the Mac App Store as well. I just like the look of it and the default templates. And lastly, if you already have text documents and you just want to see what they look like, I use Marked2 for viewing externally saved docs.
Next question.
Eric Nathan's up next from Bellingham, Washington. He says, last night on After Hours, an equipment setup question triggered a discussion of the best way to visualize equipment setup. What are your favorite tools for this task?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I was there and watched with great interest while 10 people told Eric what to do with his H2R online graphics. It was a moment of discovery because I don't think Eric had ever used it before, and I've seen it and loved it. It's a great program. So H2R gear here to record is a wonderful. You can use the free version, and there's a few other versions that add capabilities to it. But it's a nice, quick way to configure something.
And Bill?
I'm going to dive back to OmniGraffle, which is one of my go-to programs for doing anything like that. You can find libraries on a place called Graphletopia, and they have a lot of equipment libraries you can bring down. And its magic is that it was designed originally, I think, in the first days as an org chart builder. So it has a lot of snapping and a lot of linking tools. So if you need to draw a flow line between two things, you just click on one thing, draw a line to another one. It snaps to the center so that as you modify your drawing, those connections maintain themselves. And it just has a lot of capabilities as a generic graphics tool.
And Alex?
Yeah, I actually like the H2R a lot. I've played with it. I have to admit that I still do most of my drawing in OmniGraffle as well. And the reason is I have huge libraries that I actually built. So I built the libraries that I use that have all of our tools, and they're set up exactly the way I want them to be. And we build ones that are pretty complex. And my signal flow goes from, I've tried going from top to bottom, and I've talked to John about it. I can't. I go from right to left. I go from left to right, and I can't, my signal flow has to go that way or it makes me crazy. So I've been doing it for too long and too many of them. And so, OmniGraffle, because again, it's a lot more expensive, and it's, especially I have the pro version or whatever. But the wiring stuff is pretty good. And we build really complex interrelationships between things that I think would be hard to do in most other things other than CAD, which is where most of these are done. Like when you look at an industrial scale wiring diagrams, it's all done in AutoCAD.
Next question.
Alex Knight in Vancouver, British Columbia, back with any recommendations on a small messenger bag that is light. I'm traveling to Greece this week and want something that will fit my iPhone, a wallet, and a small water bottle. Can't be a backpack as I want it within my sights.
Alex?
Now, someone who's had a backpack for a long time, I can keep it in my sights all the time. so anyway, so I use my Rush 24 for most things. I think it's been on every continent. I'm doing those kind of things. I just don't let it out of my sight. But when you're looking for something a little bit smaller, I have a smaller one. This is like my smaller messenger bag type thing. I don't know if this is quite small enough for you, but this is the Hazard 4, and it's got lots of pockets, and it's over the, one single over the shoulder, but with webbing and stuff like that. I like webbing because I put a lot of things on the outside, and I like Velcro so I can mark it. So the Hazard 4 and Tactical 511 have a lot of great solutions that are robust.
Bill.
And the other brand that I go to a lot is Think Tank. Think Tank has tons of stuff. They're generally for photographers, but one of the magic pieces of them is that they're gear packs that you can put on a belt or actually come with a system. And one of the things you can do is literally move that pack around your body easily if you're putting it on something other than a belt that has belt loops. And so if I'm actually actively going somewhere and I know I'm going to want to have a lot of little things, I'll use one of their small packs that fits on your belt, and I can move it to the side if I want to get it out of the way for some reason, and also bring it right in front of me if I'm in a more high-risk security system where it's always in line of sight. So look at Think Tank. They have tons of stuff in this area. Alexander?
Yeah, the reason why I said no backpacks is because people keep telling me, people have got me paranoid now about pickpockets. So I've just felt like if I have something on my back and I can't tell what people are doing back there in a busy area, if somebody can easily just open the zipper and pull something out.
Stefan?
Yeah, I recently bought a sling bag, they call it, from Peak Design with a content volume of 3 liters, and they have a 6-liter issue or a model as well. And yeah, it depends the size you want, but this one already arrived, and it seems to be pretty sturdy and has some special slings to secure the zippers, so that nobody, even if it's on your back, can just open it and take something out.
And Alex?
Yeah, one of the things, this is actually the backpack that gets that goes around a lot for me. And one of the things is that a lot of these zippers, they're either close enough or they're dual zippered, and so a lot of times I have locks on them. So I literally will run a lock through these two. And that makes it a lot harder to open. And then the other thing you can do is front sling it. So you can, if you really feel like you're in a position where you need to pay attention to it, I'll bring it to my front as opposed to my back. So if I'm in I have to admit that I don't go into high volume areas very often because, especially overseas, it's a high risk maneuver. so it's I don't. If I see a lot of people in one place, I tend to not go there very often.
But yeah, putting it in front is actually a great idea because you
see it often.
Keep your eye, right. And somebody would have to be very intentional and like push you or something to
combined with some very, very simple traveling locks. Usually people aren't looking for that much trouble. You definitely want it to show that there's locks there. The thing you have to be careful of also is getting into a position where someone is trying to do something and they get caught doing it with you there. They may respond aggressively, to get away. So you either don't want to protect what you have or protect it and have it be very clear that it's protected, so that you just become not the most interesting target.
Right. Jon?
And most of the time, it's not unzipping the bag. It's most of the time trying to cut the bottom of the bag open. So if a bag that's slash resistant, it's going to be much more, safe. Highly unlikely someone's going to want to try to unzip, make noise. They want to just kind of cut the bottom of it, let whatever falls out, and hopefully it's something valuable.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Eric Nathan in Bellingham, Washington. I'd like to dedicate a dedicated mute button that triggers system microphone mute on my Mac. What can I do instead of spending a fortune?
Mitchell.
Well, first of all, Eric, I want to thank you for leaving my name out of the question. I think that I am the spending a bunch guy, but I'll take you from the top and then work my way down. Studio 205, nice mute button. Me right out of the picture real fast. Recently, I've seen a Mark II version of the Mic Me or Mute Me button. It's like a hockey puck. It's a clear, translucent hockey puck with a metal top on it. And my complaint when I did go through testing it was that it wasn't always accurately picking up the mute command, which was a global command, which would run to Zoom, for example, even if Zoom wasn't in focus. I'm happy to report that, as Paul has demonstrated, Valhus, that the Mic Me Mark II does do that. And for 40 or 50 bucks, that's a quick way, without spending a fortune, to get a strictly mute on your Zoom calls.
Bill?
If you have an XLR system, I use this every day. Rolls Mic Mute. It's the MS-111. It's quiet. It's small. It's very heavy, so it sits well on your desk. And the thing that I like most about it is the actual button is, when it's depressed and when it's up, even if you don't look at it, you can just run your finger over it and know exactly the state you're in. $59, I think, online, made by a company, I believe, in Utah. They're nice guys, too.
And Nigel?
Yeah, if you're a Mac user and you have the large Mac keyboard, then for Zoom, the global setting set to F19 works really well. It's on the edge of your keyboard and you can quickly press it.
And refresh my memory again, why a mute button versus using a Stream Deck or something like that?
I know, at least for me, I used the Stream Deck and I found that it was not always working, that you can't tap it quickly, that it didn't always take it, whereas the F19 on my keyboard always seems to accept.
Yeah, the Stream Deck, there's a key bounce issue that sometimes it doesn't always engage when you hit it.
It's a function of the travel in the keys on the Stream Deck. So the travel on the Stream Deck is very low. And then the result is that it's very easy for you to double tap it, because you can push it and just a vibration will cause it to turn on and then turn off again. And so, I would happily pay an extra $100 for Stream Deck to put out a Stream Deck Pro, which would just do soft keys that have more travel, that did exactly what the Stream Deck did. And a couple of us have threatened to tear apart a Stream Deck and replace it with the keys that we want. It's not that hard to do. We just leave the guts of it in there and just rebuild the outside so that it is at a professional level. It's unfortunate that they've tried to do it. It's a really powerful tool with not great buttons.
And back to you, Mitchell.
Yeah, those of us that were in broadcasting appreciate a couple of things about the right kind of buttons. One, that they're silent, and the other, that they have a very engaging click. So when you hit it, you can definitely feel it clicking or going into position without making noise.
That's actually the problem with the one that both Mitchell and I have, is that they make noise. Like I wish that it would. Yeah, I wish it would. It's another one that I've thought about replacing keys, because you can hear it. Go ahead, Mitchell. Oh, you can't hear it there.
I'm just showing.
You have to hit it right on the edge.
Hit it on the edge.
Yeah, okay. The edge is the only way to do it.
Thanks. Next question.
Next question coming from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. And Chris says, a few of us have bought the Rodecaster Pro 2. Rode has done frequent updates and has announced a future update, and he's got a link there to it. What do you think of these features? So does it move the bar for the device?
Mitchell?
I don't have one, and it's not fair for me to throw negatives at something that I don't have, that I've never had to configure. But everybody that has one has the similar problems, with it stuck on a left channel or bouncing back and forth. There's something very strange about the way it needs to be configured in order to work on office hours in particular, or on Zoom. And I've even seen Mickey struggle with it firsthand, so it's strange.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Eric Nathan, Bellingham again. Do you have any stories where your production was in peril, and what did you do about it?
Alex?
So it was actually one of my first larger productions. There was two problems. One is that we were in Moscone in New York. We were doing this big conference. It was a pretty big conference, and we'd been doing little streams for it every year, and this was the first year that they wanted us to run a studio. And we had decided, hey, we ran the studio the first time at the studio in the North Hall, and we were in the South Hall in South Moscone. And we were like, why don't we just run the everything over? So we do the main keynote, and then we'll just switch over to start doing the actual run the studio remotely. Anyway, and we had some of it running over there, but like all the graphics and all the playback and everything else we were going to do remotely. And so we ran it through fiber through Moscone. When we got to right as they got out of the keynote, the first thing is that we didn't know much about comms. And so we didn't know that the walkie-talkies aren't going to go from North Hall to South Hall. We thought, the walkie-talkies go for miles. It's not go for miles through the Moscone Center underground. So we were on cell phones. And then as it went to there was a bell ringing for the Wall Street Journal. And as they did that, the fiber between the North Hall and the South Hall melted. Like literally something in the system melted, and then we lost all connectivity to the other side. So as they fixed it, I just pushed the person that was panicking out of the way and started doing playback, and just started making stuff up. Like, I'm going to play this, and there was just a lot more. As they figured it all out, we had to keep on playing back, and it got to the point where I didn't stand up for about 12 hours. I just literally kept on running. I had to regulate how much I ate and drank because I knew that there was going to be no break long enough to stand up. And so, and we just kept on doing it. But the key is that if you were watching the show, you probably didn't know anything. You probably saw a gap for about a minute while we figured it out. And then after that, you just saw more playback than we expected to do. But if you were a viewer, you would have never known. I mean, we had 80 videos laying around, and we were just kind of cycling through them and playing them at different times, assuming that someone's not watching the whole day. And then we did get to the studio. It was just a little crippled, through the process. And I think that no one online said anything. Like, they just watched it. They were like, "This is great." Everything else, no. I had to, take a rest afterwards. but it was, but that's just an example. I mean, usually you have a lot of shows, but about one every couple months, something goes wrong. And the key is just making sure that the viewer doesn't see it. But we, and I've listened to tons of productions where cameras are going down, playback goes down, comms go down. You can't talk to someone. And this is in major broadcasts that happen out there. It's not that things aren't going wrong. In a live event, things are going wrong all the time, right. And that's what people don't usually see. And what makes the difference is redundancy. This is why you say you should always build your system 40 to 60% capacity. So when things are going wrong, if you're at 100% capacity or 110 one thing that goes wrong creates a cascading failure that everybody sees. If you're at 40, 60% capacity, things go wrong and you just kind of shift over to the other thing, you go over to the whatever. And it's the mixture of having great redundant capacity as well as having very skilled operators. Those are the two things that keep something rolling even when you have sometimes nearly catastrophic errors.
Skilled operators and people that can work under stress, because that's what it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bill?
I thought for a while that my obsession with primary, secondary, and tertiary backups was a little excessive. Then one day it wasn't. I was shooting a high-profile public speaker at a big conference, and I had a great Sony at the time wireless mic system that was hugely reliable. I also had taken the time to run an XLR cable from the board output in the back of the room into my camera, so I had those two there. But I had a little extra time, and I've always in the past decided that I would put a backup mic in place. So I had a very tall stand, a 17-foot stand. And so I ran an old EV635 up to the speaker in the actual ballroom thinking, okay, if everything else goes wrong, unless the sound goes out for everybody in the audience, I will have at least a recording of that. And I ran the XLR back, but I didn't have any place to put it. So I just left it hanging over the riser there. And sure enough, the only time in my life I have ever had A-quality batteries fail in a wireless within a minute of that, my customer starting to speak, his wireless mic went out. And I went, oh my God, and I switched because I had the second thing there, and I was looking at it, and I thought, oh God, I've got great levels from the board, from the front of house position, so I'm in great shape. And something kept bothering me for the next 10 minutes. And I thought, oh yeah, I probably should just take out the dead wireless and plug in my silly little EV635 up in the ceiling. And sure enough, about 4 minutes after that, the guy on the board hit something and killed my feed. And literally that cheap $50 microphone up at the speaker saved the entire project from having no audio whatsoever. That was the last time I ever violated primary, secondary, and tertiary backups.
And Mitchell?
Yeah, working in radio, radio tends to have that problem, unexpected failures. I was working in San Antonio at KONO, And we lost one of the phases of power at the station, which happened to be feeding the studio. So the studio went down. And you know how we are about dead air on the radio, guys. So while the engineers came swarming in to the studio area trying to restore power, I realized that we had an old remote broadcast trailer out in back of the station. And I ran around the back of the building, and there was the old Alomobile, as they called it. Went inside, fired it up. Luckily, it was on the other phase, and they were able to patch the audio into the transmitter. The only problem was it was in the middle of the summer, no air conditioning, and it had to be 120 degrees in there. It was wild.
Wow. And Alex?
One last one. When I worked at a radio station, someone broke in, and about a quarter of our library was, maybe less than a quarter, maybe 20% of our library was albums. And the rest of it was all CDs. And someone broke in and stole all the CDs. They left the albums behind. And we walked in the morning, the morning show, because the overnight didn't have anything. And we walked in, there's no CDs. And so we created the album side Friday. And so we were just going to play one whole album side at a time. We played, Flood by They Might Be Giants, and the first half of Some Great Reward from Depeche Mode. And we just kind of went from one to the next. And by the end, we got all these calls of like, hey, you should do this every Friday. We didn't end up doing it every Friday, but we did do it about every month. We had an album side Friday because people loved just listening to the whole album as opposed to, cutting from one thing to the next. So our advertisers didn't like it because there was a big chunk of time, but man, it was great. We could hang out and talk.
Next question.
Todd Perry in Prescott, Arizona is up next. Riverside.fm has been mentioned here before. Anyone on the panel have experience using them? Consistent and stable, is it? Currently using Zoom ISO and ATEM Mini Pro ISO to record remote interviews for editing later.
Alex.
The big advantage of Riverside FM is that it's recording at the location that the person's talking. So it's what we call a double end record. The downside of it is if you don't have the highest the most expensive version, it doesn't show you the whole aperture. It doesn't show you the whole screen. So you think things are cut off that aren't. You have a tendency to push to a wider shot. I don't know if that's still the case, but it was early on. But it's their local record that is their little secret. And as other people, I think the problem that Riverside's going to have is that as other people incorporate local record, it's not that big of a deal. You'll end up with, there'll be less advantages to using Riverside.
And I think Chris Fenwick uses it, so he might be a good resource to tap. Next question.
Next one comes from Gordon Lake in Los Angeles, and Gordon asks, if you test a generic Amazon 300-foot SDI cable from camera to switcher with 10-foot barreled jumper cables on both ends, and it works, what's the downside of using such cables on a shoot?
Go ahead, Alex.
It works until someone, the thing is every place that's connected, you can get a short, or you can have somebody actually unplug it, not knowing what it is. We had someone unplug ours in the middle. It's actually the last time I think I used a jumper. And so if you are going to use it, make sure to tape it up, to make sure that it's like that. It also makes sure that your jumpers are actually 75 ohm. Some people there's a bunch of jumpers that can float around that might be 50 ohm. And if you get a 50 ohm jumper into a 300-foot run, it's not going to work. And the worst part of it is in some cases when the signal isn't strong, it's fine as long as everything remains the same. But if the cable's put under duress or pulled or anything else, you could end up with a short.
Next question.
Greg Gritchmeyer in Topping, Virginia is up next. He says, have discussions started about NAB New York City in October?
Alex?
Yeah, we haven't started building a team yet. I mean, there's some discussions amongst ourselves about what we're planning to do. Part of what's delaying it a little bit is that I'm trying to work out some deals to see how much space we may have there, and whether we can, I'd like to, as opposed to just being there, I'm trying to organize a booth space there, mostly so that we have somewhere to park our stuff. But we'll also do discussions and so on and so forth. So we're trying to figure that out. That obviously changes what we do pretty dramatically, and how much we can cover NAB and AES. So stay tuned for that, but it should happen pretty quickly. We're also just we're drafting off the IBC team. So just watching what they're doing and figuring things out and allowing that to guide what we're doing. But I think that we'll be able to come up pretty fast otherwise. Sorry, there's something dropped
Mitchell?
in my house.
As Alex said, it's also the AES show, Audio Engineering Society, and it's a very big audio event. And
it's actually, the AES is at least as exciting as the NAB. I mean, the AES show, we're going to cover both of them in detail. I actually find the AES to be more enjoyable than NAB in New York. It's because that's their only show. And NAB, it's kind of their small
it's sort of like a mini NAB. It's not the full NAB, but the AES it used to be just branded as AES, and it's at the Javits Center. So it's a big show. There's a lot of stuff there.
It's great.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next with when the encoder caps on my Elektron Analog 4 MkII synthesizer came off, I contacted Elektron Support in Sweden, and they told me how to put the caps on correctly. It worked. What are your favorite small triumphs in the face of adversity?
Go ahead, Alex.
So I never took any classes on Logic, and this weekend I had a small triumph was the fact that I've been doing this thing when I need to automate, when I need to change all the things. And anybody using Logic is going to think I'm silly. But, I just know what I know. I just kind of hack into stuff and figure it out as I go. And what I've been doing is any kind of pain point with Logic, I just do a search on YouTube and go, there's someone made a video about this, I'm sure. And sure enough, I was like, how do I speed up how I'm doing it? And this little video of a guy just saying, these are 6 things that'll speed up your thing in Logic. And it turned out 3 of them were changed how long it took me to edit the podcast, this one part of managing issues from an hour to 6 or 7 minutes. And I was pretty, and so I was kind of excited about doing editing. And then I came in this morning and explained what I did. And then Todd said, well, you could just use remove silence. And so then I was like, oh, no, it gets better than that. Todd goes, you can just use remove silence. Then it's just a click. And I was like, well, I don't know if it'll get everything. And then Mickey came in and said, well, if you do a high pass filter at 1K and then run it and then apply it back to the channel, I was like, oh, that would be really fast, wouldn't it?
I think your term was ninja.
Yeah, ninja. I think my thing was there's the ninja,
right.
the ninja way to do it. So now I can't I went from being I got to stop doing these podcasts and find somebody else to do them to I can't wait for the next one so that I can apply my new. I'm going to go back and do some of the old ones just to see how it works. So anyway, so it's. Yeah, a little bit of help from your friends. That's all I got to say. So,
Mitchell?
Yeah, I know I keep talking about my $1,500 mute switch here, but I had an issue when I bought the 205. It didn't have a contact closure that could fire off an on-air light, which I thought was a glaring, missing piece of having something this sophisticated. It's got Dante, it's got analog muting, all that stuff. So I spoke to Gordon over at Studio Technologies, and he said, well, let me think about that. And when they finally delivered it, there's a little a 3.5 millimeter plug on the back there that's for remote input, to remote input. And he said, hey, just go into your software and you'll see a new thing that does the exact opposite. So you click the software and it does a contact closure for you instead of doing the remote latching. So I know I'm kind of over embellishing the story here, but it was just, if you ask, you're going to get an answer. And sometimes the answer is good and sometimes it's quick.
Bill, real quick.
Just pass me by.
Okay. And I'll say that my biggest win, I'm in the midst of lots of RFPs and stuff, and I can speak faster than I can type. So just going into my notes and then recording or doing voice to text and writing all that out and handing it off to someone. So it's like, oh my goodness. So that's a great hack if you have a lot of documents to write. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. In an article about the NASA Space Launch System rocket, one quote was, there's nothing quite like feeling sound, not just hearing it, but feeling it wash over you. Like the secret to that immersive field in your mixes and synth sounds?
Alex?
The LFE. The big LFE is the secret to that.
Awesome. Well, we are at that mark, probably a few seconds to spare, but I think we can go ahead and transition over to our second hour where we're going to be talking about leadership development, but more so on how to get prepared for that next job or for your promotion internally. And I'm so happy to have Jon Snyder here with us. He's not he's not new to office hours. He's a part of the community, and we have so many people in the community with special skill sets. And I asked Jon, can you come and talk on Monday? And he said, sure. So welcome, Jon.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to just dive right in. And while we were going back and forth and just trying to figure out the best way to present this information, you shared, or you know what, actually, I should take a step back so that you could tell us a little bit more about how you became the managing director of development at a contact center.
Yeah, it's a funny story. I've been involved in some form of education, whether adolescent or adult education, for the last 20 years or so. I actually started at a small church in Reno, or Yerington, Nevada. It's a tiny little farm town, about 80 miles south of Reno. And eventually I have two special needs boys and started looking for work in Reno where I could have more help for our children in particular. And so just started applying at jobs and applied for one that was for a trainer. And it was about 6 years ago now. And halfway through the interview, the person said, "Did you know this is a contact center?" I said, "No, I did not." But long story short, I got hired there at a local hospital here in Reno, Nevada. We have about 8,000 employees. Our contact center has about 200 agents, people answering phone calls. And over the course of my 6 years here, I've gone from being a trainer into a supervisor, now a manager. And so, yeah, it's a mouthy term, but I'm the manager of learning and development for the contact center, which means me and my teams are responsible for making sure that all 200 agents we hire about 100 people a year, so about 50% attrition rate. But we're responsible for making sure we have the right people in the right place at the right time, whether it's training new hires or scheduling people to make sure that they're covering the right shifts, or just making sure that our supervisors have the tools that they need to take care of their employees. And it's really important to me to, all my life, I've really enjoyed helping people bring the most out of their work, to give them their best selves. And so it's always been really important for me to lead and develop people. And so that's one of the things I'm most passionate about, is helping people take the next step in their careers.
And I think coming off of, we had Cher Jones last week that was she shared about personal branding and how you bring your full self to the workplace. But then now what you're presenting to us today is, now that you're here, before you apply for your next job or role, how to prepare for that. And I believe there's some information that you want to share with us on what that looks like.
Yeah, and what I find at the contact center, we're very much an entry-level position, and people come here because they want to be somewhere else in the hospital. Most people don't want to work in a contact center their entire careers, and that's totally understandable. And what I find is that also, most people aren't very good at figuring out what they need to take that next step. And there's really three fundamental principles that if you do these three things well, you'll make sure that you're giving yourself the best chance you have to get promoted. And most of us, when we think about our jobs, we think about, especially technical people, we say, well, my job is getting results. And when you're early on in your career, that's 100% true. Your first position, your second position is 85% getting results. And what we tend to forget is this little segment in the top corner, which is relationships. When you're in your first position, your main relationship is with your boss. And your boss's job, and if you are a boss, one of your jobs is to help your employees get the relationships they need so that they can get to know other people, so that they can be ready for their next step. But technical people especially, we think to ourselves, well, I do a great job. I'm good at my job. I have few errors. I have a high quality product. That should be enough to get promoted. And the fact is that results are not enough. Especially as you get higher up in an organization, relationships, working with other people, knowing who you can work with, giving favors to other people, working in cross-functional teams, those get more and more important. So as you grow in your career, these relationships end up being half or more of what you're accountable to. And if you're not good at building relationships, it's a skill you need to learn. You don't have a choice in the modern world, because the higher up you get in an organization, the less you yourself have a direct impact on the work because you're working with other people. You have maybe employees working for you in management. Whatever the case, the higher up in the organization, the work product is a result of multiple people coming together rather than just one person. And then the third thing that people don't understand is undergirding all of this is the ability to communicate. And if you can't communicate, if you don't know what specifically or how to frame your words and your actions so other people understand it, it's like if a tree falls in the forest. If you can't communicate your results and relationships, then the hiring manager can't hear it. So I want to talk mostly today about what you can do to be ready for your next step internally in your organization. But we can also talk through things like, as a manager, what should you be doing? We can talk through other questions people might have. But really, this hour is really for you, those of you who work in large organizations especially, who maybe want to get promoted, but you're not sure what you need to do next. So there should be a poll if it hasn't come in there. I'm asking you to vote. Which would you like to cover first? Results, relationships, or communication?
And what I love about the topic today, but then even as you gave us that breakdown, our focus is on individuals that are inside of an organization and or managers, but this is almost like a life a life hack of making sure communicating with people and relationship building, because that doesn't go away. These are transferable skills in the workplace, but then also just in life overall. And once that poll gets going, then we can go into, because what we're using the poll is, and we're testing this out today, so I'm liking where we're going here so that we can get an idea of what we can cover first, what you would like to cover first. So it's almost like a choose your own adventure with Jon, our guest here. Alex?
Yeah, and I've done a lot of things, but every break I've gotten, every connection that I've ever had, literally everything has been who I knew. And it's not, who my parents knew or who someone else. I mean, in some cases it was when I was a kid, but it really was, being in the right place, supporting people that were, supporting a lot of people around me. And those connections just kind of naturally occur when you're helping other people, when you're not. Now, the tricky part of it is that people can get very transactional about things. So there's when you're interacting with a lot of people, you can be relational or transactional. A transactional person will often have a quid pro quo. If I do this for you, what will you do for me? Or I did this. The worst is I did this for you 2 months ago, and now I need a favor. I need you to do. I'm going to pull it. I'm going to pull a favor because I gave you one. What that means is the person will never want to give you a favor and never want to ask you for anything again. So the good news is you won't have to do very many favors. The bad news is that you won't have a lot of people in your crew. And so, one thing that I admit, I grew up with some family members that were very transactional. And so it made me super sensitive to it. And so I tend to almost never do that. I may help someone and then I ask them for something. If they say no, that's fine. They can't do that right now. But the main thing is that I don't, I try to stay as far away from a transactional relationship with anybody as possible, because I think that it really undermines, even down to the fact that my wife will tell you that I go to the same places all the time. I get to know every person by their name. I get to know every, because there's all kinds of things, life is all about relationships and when you, and being connected to people around you. So, I mean, even all the way down to the people that I buy the chemicals for my pool, I know everybody. I know their background. I know where they live. I know, I sit there and talk to them while they're doing my test. We sit there and chit chat. And I'm building up a relationship with them, and if I need a little extra advice or them to stay open for an extra 2 minutes because I'm running late, all those things happen because I don't treat them transactionally. I don't treat them like a body that's sitting there managing my order, and I do that everywhere. And then I go back to the same places over and over again because of that. And it makes life much easier. I'm always amazed when people don't take full advantage of just being connected to people around them.
And Bill?
And I'm echoing basically everything, but I want to frame it in terms of NAB. I went to NAB for, I think, 5 or 6 years before I realized that I wasn't there to see things. I was there to meet people. And when I switched that orientation for me and started building a network and just getting to know the people I ran across, everything changed in my career, because some of those people ended up in positions to be able to hire me and to have relationships with me, or that were experts in their field. And having met them and spent time with them and gotten to know them meant that I could call on them as a resource. I've got this problem. Do you know any ideas how to fix it? Or is there anybody you know that you can direct me to who can fix it? Changed everything for me. So +1 in all this.
So it looks like we have the poll results. So thank you so much, team, for putting that together and sharing that. It looks like in first place, people want to hear more about relationships, which the panel so eloquently shared some of their stories. Next, they want to hear about communication. And then third, results. So I'm going to bring that back to you, Jon, for you to start talking about relationships. And then this is your opportunity, your relationship questions that you have. Please go ahead and submit them into Mukana, so that as Jon is speaking, then we'll be able to answer them as we go along.
Yep. And so we'll talk a little bit here, and other people on the panel can certainly talk as well. And then we'll take some time to answer your relationship-specific questions before we move to the next topic. And when you think about relationships, one of the reasons why organizations are effective, why does the world coordinate and why did humans group together, is because of the specialization of labor and what it allows us to do. If each person is not trying to do everything, we can do more. You don't have to be the farmer and the tanner and the hunter and the parent. You can focus on one or two of those things. And in organizations, that's why organizations form, is you can have a whole team that's dedicated to one task or one plan, instead of trying to train everyone to do everything or expect everyone to do everything. And so it's really important to understand not just what you're supposed to be specializing in, but how do you fit into the whole for your organization? What would be missing in your company if you weren't here, if your department wasn't here? And once you understand that, that's what tells you where can you start partnering? Where can you expand your influence and your reach? And specifically, I know I already mentioned this, I'm going to draw my own little org chart here. So that little circle on the bottom is you. And then that circle there is your boss. And just to make it a little more interesting, sorry for my dots.
What are you using to do that?
The bigger
It's my own little secret sauce, Alex. It's an app called Presentify.
Okay.
So the most important relationship you have at work is with your immediate boss. Whoever your supervisor is, the most important thing you can do is get to understand who they are, to communicate openly with them. You don't have to be best friends with your boss or your colleagues, but you need to have open lines of communication, because if you're struggling personally, you have a choice. You can either choose to share nothing, you can choose to share some information, or you can choose to be an open book. Now, most bosses, myself included, want somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, because if I know you're going through something personal, it helps me accommodate what you need. And when I can help accommodate you, that helps you bring your best to the organization, because the organization is at the best when each employee can do their best work. So you need to have a regular meeting with your boss. We usually call them one-on-ones. And if you are a boss, I recommend having one-on-ones with each person that reports to you every week. I know it's a lot of work. It's 100% worth it. And I've done it with teams up to a dozen people without even impacting my ability to do the rest of my work. And half an hour a week, just talking, asking, giving the employee an opportunity to share or talk about whatever they need to talk about first. So if they have questions, they bring it to the one-on-one. And why that's really important is, as a boss, that means they're also not asking me those same questions throughout the week. So it actually gives me more time when I have them a set time where they know that they have with me, and they can answer any questions they have, they can bring up any issues they have, and we can talk through it together. So far and away, the most important relationship you have at work is with your boss. But there's other important relationships too, especially if you're in that point where you want to get promoted. Because your boss is probably not going to be the person hiring for that next position unless you're applying for your same role. And in that case, you're already there. Instead, your boss's boss is much more likely to be on that hiring committee. And so you need to get in situations where your boss's boss understands the work you are doing. How are you contributing to the team? So if your boss's boss has things like skip level meetings, I really encourage you to go to those. They're almost always worth it because you get to know them, what they want, and how you can help their goals for the organization. You can ask your boss to delegate some work to you, which frees your boss up to do higher level work and gives you some of that face time with their leader as well. Any opportunity you have to get to know your boss's boss, and I'm not saying it in a manipulative way, it's in a very, very much a how can I help the organization in a service mindset instead of a transactional mindset, like Alex was saying, is a really great opportunity. If nothing else, you get to know somebody else and you can better understand what you're trying to do in the org. Now, let's say you want a promotion and you want a promotion to a level that's higher than the level you're at now. Your boss's boss is likely to be the hiring manager there. So it's important for them to know who you are and what you've done for the organization. But you have to remember that the other people applying for the same job are going to be either employees of your boss or of your boss's peers. So your other key relationships are with your boss's peers. And you have to be really careful here because you don't want to go behind your boss's back at all, but you still want to find opportunities to work with other teams. It broadens your knowledge about the organization and how you fit in. It helps you understand how the work product you are producing adds to the organization. And when it's time for that hiring manager, your boss's boss, they're going to ask your boss, their peers, about all the applicants. And if you can have everyone who that hiring manager is consulting with, if you have every one of those people, at least know that you are a hard worker who gets stuff done and is good to work with, these are the people who will eventually be your peers. And so it's important to at least establish a relationship with them. You're not going to work with them a lot, but how you do this is sign up for committees. If there's a project between two different departments, eagerly say, yes, I want to be a part of that. And you would be shocked at the number of people in any organization who are unwilling to put discretionary effort in, unwilling to volunteer for extra work, unwilling to be that person who says, yes, I can handle that. I'll figure out how later. So those are some key relationships you need to build. If anyone else in the panel wants to add anything, now would be a good time, or any questions you have about relationships we can handle next.
Yeah, we have some questions that have come in, but I want to, before we get there, is to bring in Harshid to share his part.
So you mentioned some interesting points as far as that one-on-one, and I found that when I worked with my boss, that was a key point of putting the problems or stressors on the table and not bringing them inside of the call center. The second portion I wanted to take note also is, as everybody has said, is that transactional versus just doing it for service, servant leadership, potentially. That's a word that kind of comes to mind, where you want to do things for the organization, but you don't always look at it as, well, I'm not getting a paycheck bump, because I think that really relies on your promotion as a person. It means that you're willing to give all of your efforts, and you're part of a organization to be on the same page as them. So I think in many cases with the word promotion, the way I have noted it, and me being vision impaired, people think, okay, well, I'm working at a call center, well, I'm not going anywhere. Well, being vision impaired doesn't mean that you have to just be that, call lead. You could be a call supervisor, or you could be a manager for that matter. But I think what really makes a great leader is understanding the pieces of what the whole puzzle is, and then finding your strengths and even knowing that where you're weak at, so you could strengthen those weak points in the overall organizational strategies per se. But that's a little bit of information that I just wanted to give. Thanks.
Thank you. Nigel.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of great points Jon made. Well, the first one is the way he describes this desire to do and be willingness to do things that others don't. I've always thought of as hunger. And I'm amazed people don't understand that you need to demonstrate hunger in a workplace, particularly in a large company, if you're going to succeed. And you may have exactly the same skills as another candidate. But if that other candidate has done those things Jon talked about, has volunteered for the projects, has been around, and to be honest with you, in the old world, it would have been physically worked a bit longer hours, was more visible. They will demonstrate hunger and they are more likely to get the job, fair or not as it is. The second thing I will tell you is that I've sat around a number of top tables where we've talked about candidates for executive roles, directors, vice presidents, and senior roles. The number one thing that kills the chances of somebody's promotion is the phrase, two things. Two things. First of all, what Jon said, which is, I don't know who that person is. So they're not known by the other people in the network. And the second thing that can really kill people is when someone says, but they don't play nice with others. And if that's the reputation you have, then that will cancel out any chance you have of making the step you want to make.
Those are some really good points there, especially the not playing well with others. That's across the board. Alex?
Yeah, and I've been on both sides of those things. There have definitely been times when I didn't play well with others, but also I, usually the part that I get myself caught up in is I'll get frustrated that we're doing something very inefficient, and I'll be blunt about that. And usually I've learned that I had to learn better ways to communicate that, or not communicate it at that point, and find ways to be, to try to move things to a direction that made sense for everyone. But didn't necessarily ruffle as many feathers on the way there, and that's some like soft skills that Jon talks about that you really have to refine if you want to move forward. To echo what Nigel said, I mean, with every job that I've gotten, I get in. I was given a very basic job and then I expand it. And usually that expansion takes a lot of work and a lot of thinking and focus and prioritizing those things. When I walked into a radio station, I rebuilt the way that they managed their library and did voiceovers and did anything else that they asked me to do. And before I knew it, I had more responsibility, because you'll find that a large portion of the folks around you don't do that. so if you get focused on showing up and being useful and just getting done what needs to get done, you'd be surprised at how quickly you can move through an organization.
Yeah, and interesting that you say that, because that's how I got from Toronto to Dallas. I was in Dallas first because it was just showing up, and I was in a journalism program, and everybody was just tapping their mentors or their network. And I remember hearing on the radio that there was some symposium at the mall, and I said, hey, can I go interview, said publisher? And he was actually a publisher of a national magazine, but it was based here in Atlanta. And just going out and doing the interview, first of all, that impressed him, that he said years later, like, where's that young lady who interviewed me? So that opened the door. I would not be here right now if that had not happened. But what I wanted to touch on, and I'm really happy that we're having this conversation about relationships, is, and I think just from observing a lot of the members in the office hours community, that a lot of us being thinkers and curious, like we just want to get to the work and we just want to do a great job. But that element of doing a great job does not always mean that you will be seen, especially by people who are not necessarily on that project. So the map that or the diagram that you shared, Jon, earlier of, your first relationship being your supervisor or your manager, but then also the level up, that key line of that it's probably not your manager that's moving you around the organization. It's their peers or those around them, and how important it is to have some FaceTime with them. So I really appreciate you diving into that. And just to double check, should we move into, I know that some of the questions, the two questions that we have do actually go to relationships. So can we answer those first before you go into the communication?
Yeah, let's do some questions.
Awesome. Go ahead.
Our first one comes from Liberty White. What kind of relationship should an entry-level employee or crew member be looking to build?
So what I would say is there's two different sets of relationships you want to maintain. And it is more than just introducing yourself. It's talking with the person over time and keeping those relationships warm. internally in your organization, you need to work well with the departments that work well with you. And what I mean is, if as a trainer, I was training people on how to answer phone calls, and so I had to make sure that I maintain my relationships with our telecom team, which is the IT group who does our telephony system. I made sure that I made contact with our relationships with our EPIC training team, which is our electronic medical record. And I had someone I reported to from a training perspective there. I made sure to other people in the building who I saw regularly, I would stop and get to know. So you want the people you work with first. Then you also want to think about, where do I want to go in the organization? What do I want my next step to be? And not all career growth has to be vertical. You might want to go into a lateral position in another department with similar responsibilities to get a bigger scope of the organization. And so in our case, we have our scheduling call center, which is my department, but there also is opportunities with the billing call center. And so I got to know some of the trainers over there. And when I say got to know, is I would look for reasons to stop by their office and put my hand out, shake it and say, "Hi, I'm Jon. I'm in the engagement center, and here's what I do." Or look for reasons to say, "Here's something we're doing in our department that I thought you might find helpful. Take it or leave it. This is something that we found helpful. Do you have any tips for us?" And I actually, because I'm so bad at relationships, and I'm speaking as someone who's very introverted, who doesn't typically like people, just generally speaking, and I know that sounds bad, it doesn't come natural for me. So I literally made a spreadsheet, and I outlined in the spreadsheet each of the departments that we work closest with. So I outlined telecom, IT, EPIC, self-pay call center. And I wrote down the name of one person in each of those departments. And I chose some of our vendors as well. And I actually put a spreadsheet together that said the person's name, which team they're a part of, and the last time I spoke with them. And anytime that one of those names, the last time I spoke to someone was more than 6 months, I made a point to find a reason to talk to them. Even if it was just sending an email saying, "Hey, just wondering how things are going for you." Or, "Hey, I heard this change happened in your department. Hope all is well." Something to have an occasion to keep that relationship alive. Anything you can do is helpful in that respect.
I like that phrase. Any reason that you can find to keep the relationship alive. Awesome point. Nigel?
Yeah, just to extend that, Jon did a great way of describing the internal relationships to your organization. I would suggest you also add external to this view. And so your network both needs to be people inside your organization and outside the physical company or organization you're in. Trade groups, union groups, lots of places where people meet who are interested and involved and are part of the industry you want. And so try and get a mixture of those, because I can tell you that often I've interviewed people for senior jobs or junior jobs in particular areas, and I've said, "Who in the industry knows you?" If I picked up the phone to the following person, would they know who you were? And if the answer is no, then you're not that influential in that industry. You're not well connected. And I'm also interested in getting people who are both connected inside and outside the organization. So care and feeding of both sides of that network are essential.
Bill?
Also, I had an experience early in my career on a volunteer thing that we were doing. My wife was involved with it. It had to do with her school. And I watched them build a big volunteer crew. And I have never forgotten the lesson of, on the day of the actual event, the chair of that stood up in front of everybody and said, "I have some people to thank." And she proceeded to thank all the wealthy people who had donated stuff, which I get. The money there. What she hadn't done was acknowledged any of the people who had put their heart and soul into building the actual event as workers on the ground level. All the praise from the stage went to one group. None of it went to the people. And what struck me so much is the next year they tried to put on the same charity fundraiser. Nobody showed up to help. It was just as clear as night and day that the management style of this chairperson, she was kind of looking to build relationships for herself with one group and paid no attention to the actual people who ran things down on the level. So if she just reached down to 2 or 3 of the key players, if she understood who those key players were and who had really stepped up, built their own crews, everybody would have felt good because at least, Jon or Carol would have gotten a nod from the stage, and that would have filtered down through the ranks. And I think it could have kept that event going. But the failure to reach down and acknowledge the people who put in the real time doing the work was tragic for that event.
Yeah, Todd Reynolds in the comments says, yes, Bill Davis, start with the colleagues. Alex?
Exactly. I mean, if you get seen as a climber, it really, if everybody sees you as a climber, it's a real hard to, it's hard to get over that, and the main thing is that the trickiest part about this is that if you calculate it too much, it's very easy for it to look calculated. I think that I think at the beginning I thought of it in a more calculating way, but I have to admit my general nature is I just want to do what I want to do, and I'm interested in people around. I get interested in the folks around me, because it gives me more flavor to what I'm doing. I don't like, as we've talked about in the past, I don't like large crowds. I don't like a lot of people, and I realize that it's partially because I don't like to try to figure that out for everyone. But the people that I work with, I generally want to know what makes them tick, mostly just to make it more enjoyable. Like if they're, I don't want them to be, look at an email from me like, oh, what is he sending? That kind of thing. But I'm mostly just interested. It just makes the process more painless of doing whatever I'm doing. Also look for things that people like, pay attention to the little things. Like what kind of coffee does everyone around you like? Like what kind of, what do they like to eat? What do they like to, so if you go out and grab something, it's one thing to say, hey, I'm going to go out and grab things for folks. It's another thing to say, to bring back something that you already know that they like, and I can't say that I do that all the time, but paying attention to what those things are, makes a difference. It makes people, understand that they're valued, and again, it's just being interested in them, and there'll be little things like they're frustrated with, someone, like it, and see if you can fix those things, and the one challenge in this area, again, if you look like you're doing it just to get ahead or to network or whatever, blah, it comes across really worse than if you hadn't done anything. The other thing that people get themselves into is they want to help everybody, and you do have to say no. At times you have to manage, making sure that you actually, while your management style becomes important, getting things done is still the baseline. It's still, that's still table stakes, is getting done what needs to get done. And then you can work on all the extra stuff.
And Jon.
Yeah, I think intent matters a lot. Like it may not be something that I want to do, but I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, not to get ahead in any sort of way. And I think the biggest thing when it comes to like relationships, especially when it comes to outside your boss, is consistency and making sure that they know what to expect from you. So when they reach out, I know how Jon is going to react to this, or I know that he can step in and help, and I trust to get it done. If you can build that type of relationship, those other relationships start folding from other things. And when I think about the different groups of peers that I have, at least in my office, we have, about 8,000 team members here. And I look at like, I have a strong relationship with this person. I can leverage that relationship to then start building relationships around other people that sit around them. And there could be like a instant trust because someone else, has a trust relationship with me. So knowing what those are, knowing what those critical points are in the organization are huge.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Eric Antonio in Washington, D.C. How important is respecting the chain of command in a matrixed environment? Is it advisable to build a relationship with your boss's boss when they initiate contact repeatedly, perhaps to circumvent your boss?
Jon, I want to hear what you have to say.
Your boss, your direct leader, is your lifeline to the organization. And you should always maintain the chain of command unless they're doing something that's truly unethical and you need to escalate beyond them. It's very easy when you're trying to build relationships to accidentally circumvent your boss. And the only thing that can do is lead to heartache. So make sure you're in communication with your boss and you're talking through those things because they might also help you prioritize the work you need to be doing. So yeah, it's good to build a relationship and get to know those people in higher levels, but you shouldn't use it as a way to usurp your boss's authority.
Nigel?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'll give you two thoughts. Number one, you should always expand your network. The more people who know you, the better. That will help you in the long run. But the second thought is sometimes you don't know the whole picture. Sometimes there's something going on you don't know. And, well, what seems blindingly obvious to you can really be completely different in a different context. So making sure you get the bigger context before you put yourself in a bad position is a good idea. But I would tell you the most important thing you can do is dedicate yourself to making your boss a success. And so try and stop your boss putting themselves in a place where they will get themselves into trouble, where they could get confused, where they will look wrong, and they will pay you back in terms of your career progression. And if they don't, then you have a bad boss. And my general advice to people is if you have a bad boss, move on. It is much better to have a good boss in a bad company than a bad boss in a good company. And sometimes you just have to accept you got the wrong person.
And Jon?
I find myself often working with my boss or my boss's boss or my boss's boss's peers. And what I find is a lot of people reach out to me because of that relationship. What I just tend to do is just create a system of communication so I can just backfeed that information. So then my boss is aware, because chances are someone's going to say something or mention something, and I don't want him to get caught flat-footed. And so for me, it's all about just that back channel communication. Say, hey, I'm working on this for whomever. Just want you to be aware. Is there any way you want me to handle this? Give them an opportunity to step in if they want to. If they don't, then I, continue on my path.
Jon, let's go back to you, because I think the question after will probably play really well into your conversation around communications.
All right. So that's relationships, and it's the hidden gem that a lot of people don't leverage or work well at. The other thing that I notice as a hiring manager, like I said, we hire around 100 people a year in the call center. I've hired 6 or 8 people on my team just in the last year, and people are really bad at communicating their results and their relationships. And what I mean by that is, oh, hold on. My drawing broke.
It's not communicating right.
There we go. Sorry about that. I was drawing on the wrong screen. Talent in an organization follows a normal distribution curve. And if you remember statistics, normal distribution curves have what's called standard deviations. And mathematically, in a normal distribution, something like 96% of your sample fits within 2 standard deviations. And for those of you who don't really enjoy math, what that means is most people are in this big chunk in the middle of the talent spectrum. So if you're looking at how good people are at their jobs, the majority of people are average to slightly above or slightly below average. And a very, very small group of people is above average. A very small group demonstrates that they are better than everyone else. An even smaller group is able to communicate that in an interview or on a resume. And it's really common for me to get a resume. I'm hiring for a trainer right now. And I get lots of resumes that tell me what you were supposed to do. As a trainer, I was responsible for making sure we had an onboarding program for a call center of 200 representatives. And that's great. But if your resume doesn't indicate that you're good at your job, if your resume looks exactly the same as someone who got fired for doing a bad job, well, then your resume is a poor resume. Yes, you need to put your responsibilities on it, but you also need to be able to communicate how good you were at it with something that is measurable and actionable, that anyone reading it can see that you're doing a good job. So instead of saying I was responsible for an onboarding program, what I put on mine is I developed an onboarding program that reduced our 90-day attrition rate by 75%. And that led to a $500,000 savings for the company over the course of a year. So you can tell not just what I'm supposed to do, but how good I am at doing it. And you need to be able to, and here's where people really struggle, is they don't think in terms of what impact, what measurable impact does the work I do have on the organization. And it includes not just your resume, but in your interview responses as well. People will tell me what they think or what they would do. And I don't care so much about that. I want to know what you have done, because you're more likely to continue what you have done in the past than you are to do something different in the future. So you need to learn how to phrase. And when you're doing interview prep or resume prep, or when you're just talking to people, I see there's a question about being recognized in the chat. You need to be able to quantify the tasks you do and the work you do, what you did, explain the problem that you approached, explain how you thought through the solution, and explain what the impact of the results were. And
Can
that's
you say
really
that again, because I think that was like worth the it's weighted gold.
Yeah, I'll try to say exactly. You need to be able to explain the problem, the context of the problem, how you identified the problem, how you outlined what possible actions you had. So your approach to the problem itself. You need to be able to communicate to the person the solution you developed and why, and then lastly, the results of the problem.
Awesome.
So, do we have any other questions?
Oh,
That's it.
Sorry. Because I was like, okay,
I didn't
more.
coordinate this with Liberty very well.
No. It's because there's a lot of conversation as well going on in the chat as and it might be also, well, if you, because they're speaking about like resumes. Chris Fritchie says his resume would be 12 pages long. We know that's not the case. Your resume should be roughly, and it changes, right? So I've heard the standard is approximately 2 pages, but if you are going for something more senior, does that make a difference as well? And how long, like what key elements should be on a resume when you are looking for that right fit?
Part of your resume is demonstrating your communication skills and demonstrating that you can succinctly describe the work you've done and the impact it's had. So I'm always more impressed with someone who can have the same content of information in a 1-page resume than someone who sends me a 2 to 4-page resume, especially if it's for an entry-level position at a call center. But I've seen and I've heard guidance that says up to 2 pages if you're very senior. I still would be more impressed personally if I saw someone able to describe it into a single page. And there's a whole bunch of tricks, and maybe we can talk about it in an after hour sometimes, ways that you can format the text of your resume to give you an extra few lines.
Awesome. And I'll just pull this other one comment from the chat, and then we can go back to questions. Eduardo Augustine says, I changed my resume to cater to the job that I'm applying for. Nigel DeSalle says, I write mine for each job I go after. So, Bill, next question.
Our next question comes to us from Lenny Nelson, in San Antonio, Texas. How can value be recognized when work is taken for granted because, quote, you make it look so easy?
Nigel?
I think the hardest thing for people as they're starting to build their career is to think through where you want to get to. So if you don't know where you're going, doesn't matter what direction you take. We understand that, basic strategy. But the same is true of your career. And if you really haven't thought through, and you can change it where you want to get to, then you can get stuck in a job that you really don't want to be in. And if you don't think you're being valued, and if you've tried to communicate it, and that's not working, then you've really got to ask the question whether you're in the right place. And I appreciate that's difficult and jobs aren't easy to get. And we can all find 1,000 excuses why we don't look elsewhere. But the most important question for you would be, if I'm not being valued, is that, as Jon articulated, am I unable to communicate what I'm doing, or am I in an organization that doesn't care? And you can't fix the organization that doesn't care. The other lens you might want to think through is it's not what you know, and it's not necessarily who knows what you know. It's how you use what you know to get work done around you. And that's what you've got to be able to demonstrate. You've got to be able to demonstrate that you can use the stuff you know. And if that's no value to the organization, you are in the wrong organization.
Jon?
Yeah, and I want to point out one thing Nigel says, and a word I'm using also, is demonstrate, because it's not just enough to do it. You need to demonstrate to the person who's hearing you, because communication is what the listener does. And if you can't communicate what you want so they hear what you need them to hear, it's you who's doing the miscommunication.
And
as far as, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
As far as what to do if someone says you make it look so easy, a good response is always something like, thank you. Here's a particularly challenging thing I went through in this instance. So if it was after production, thank you. It was really challenging when the power went out and what we had to do was X, Y, or Z. And just give a quick example of how it's more complex and what's all behind it.
And Alexander?
Well, I think all of us have been around for long enough that we've all worked at some company at one point in our lives where our value wasn't really recognized, and there's no better time to look for a new job than when you already are in one. So I would say a good manager will always recognize the value and contributions that you are bringing to the team, and if they aren't, then you should really look at moving on.
And Nigel?
I just want to add a silly story to the end of that one, which was I was in a company, we got acquired by another company, and I went to my boss and I said, here's the job I want. And they said, well, if you want that job, you're going to have to demonstrate, to the point, the following 5 things. So I went back a year later and I said, you said I needed to demonstrate the following 5 things. Here is what I've demonstrated. He went, yeah, but, we're not going to give you that job. I didn't talk to him again. I left.
That's one way to solve it. And just going to this question for you, Lenny, is don't be afraid to reiterate the value that you do bring to the table. I think that a lot of great points being said that is it time to shift, to go elsewhere. But sometimes people just like, oh, wow, that's so easy. And reiterating the fact of it's taken you 10 years to learn this and some of that storytelling part of it as well, because that's really when we're communicating the story of our skill sets. So it might be really helpful to maybe even brainstorm some of the ways to answer that, or some of the ways that you can quickly just have those snackable responses to people who then will make those kind of comments. And Bill?
Yeah, people who make it look so easy are people who are good at what they're doing. They've spent so much time getting to be good at it that they don't have to, it's not perspiration, it's inspiration and execution anymore. And, I always felt when people were saying, oh, you worked so hard to learn that, was it worth it? It's like, yes, because now I have it. And if I go away, it goes away with me. I'm not saying that nobody else can have the same skills, but the whole point of getting to be really good at things is so that your life does get easier. The second time I do any task, fixing plumbing, messing with the wiring, the first time I'm a mess. The more I do it, the better I get at it. That is the path you want to take through life. So take that idea as a compliment to you. You've managed mastery at something. That means you can master other things. And all those skills you master stay with you as you go through life. So you're winning. Congratulations.
Great point. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Jason Panks in Nashville, Tennessee. When moving up in a position, how do you train or prepare your replacement?
Jon.
At every given moment, you need to be able to hand off any part of your job to somebody else because you don't know when an emergency might come up. And it starts with documenting the tasks, the work you do, and how you get them done. And then when you start preparing to look at a job search or preparing for other opportunities, start identifying who's somebody that you can teach one aspect of your job to. Especially if you are a leader, if you're a manager or a supervisor, if you have direct reports under you, you should find opportunities in your one-on-ones to think through, what is this person good at? What is something they want to grow in and that I can help develop them in? And what is a task I can hand this person so that I can delegate to the person so that they can grow and I can be freed up to do more important work. It's always more efficient for the organization if the person lowest in the organization who can do the work does the work. It's simply, if nothing else, cost per hour of labor. So look for specific opportunities where you can teach one person one task. You're not trying to give away your whole job, but you need to have documented and outlined specifically what you do and hand that off to somebody else so that you can do things like take vacations or have a pregnancy, that sort of thing. You need to find opportunities to hand those sorts of things off. And one thing I find is people are so protective about their jobs that they try to become the only person in an organization who can do something. And all that does is lock you in because people don't see you as doing anything outside of that. People see you as the one key to that particular task, and you won't be able to get rid of it. So you need to look for ways to spread the love. That's why we have organizations, and have a backup for any task you have.
Nigel.
If you make yourself irreplaceable, you will be unable to be replaced. So if you want to have that job forever, then make yourself irreplaceable. I can tell you, when I've been a manager of a team, the first person I hire or the first person I identify is the person who will replace me when I move on, because it's going to happen. It may take a year, it may take 3 years, and having that person around me. And if you're not a manager, you're just an individual employee, an individual contributor, then what Jon said is absolutely right. Find a way to divide the work up so you can both take your vacations and be replaced at some point.
And Bill.
Yeah, succession planning is often mission critical. And if you're not doing it, particularly as you move up the ranks, you're not doing your job. But I also acknowledge that this is often fear driven. I can't tell you the number of people who I know in their heart of hearts say, if they know too much about what I do, they make less than I, maybe I will be replaced by them. And it's a difficult emotional thing to face because, let's face it, businesses do sometimes do that. I've seen a lot of circumstances. When the Twin Towers were hit, I remember seeing organizations, and it was the middle management and above that got hollowed out there for a while as the economy was really shaky. They kept the people on top because executives never really lose their jobs, and they hollowed out the bottom they kept the bottom organization. The people are answering the phones because they needed those to keep the business. But that middle area got decimated a good little bit, and it was very painful to watch. And the only thing I can come back to, the thing that gives you a little bit of a shield against that is what we talked about very first. It's the relationships. You know, if you're deeply embedded into the organization and you're providing value, not just in terms of the amount of effort you put in on those few hours, but up and down, you have allies and you've built networks of people who have learned to depend on you and that you can depend on them when the going gets rough. That is your shield from being the person who says, you know, as somebody in the executive suite going, well, we got 3 people at this salary and we only can afford 2. Who's going to go away? Your relationship network will give you the best shield against that, in my opinion.
And then just bringing in JJ McKenna in the comments saying, teaching your skill set to a person from an entirely different department can also reveal a hidden skill set that another person had never known about themselves before. All right, Jon, so we're going to go back to you with the final part of the puzzle, the final pillar of results.
Yeah, and none of this matters if you don't produce results. You can talk a big game, you can build relationships, you can communicate all sorts of things, but if you can't do the job, you might get that next promotion, but you're not going to keep it for long. And so when we're thinking about results, you can think about your job description as a cup. And there is some level of basic skills that you need to do in order to just keep your job. You have a minimum requirements for your job description. And like I said before, most people do the minimum, but not much more. But we see a lot of people who are high performers doing the work, and they feel like just because I'm good at my job, I deserve the promotion because I'm top of my class. And again, it's not just the ability to do your job or to do your job exceptionally well that gets you ready for the next job, because you're not applying for your same job. You're not trying to get the same job you already have. You need to demonstrate that you have the key skills that are required for the next level up. So as you identify what kinds of jobs you want to apply for, or you want to talk about or grow into, you need to ask yourself, what are the skills I need to be able to do that job? And specifically, you want to be so good at your job that your results are overflowing into other parts of the company. You need to do things like volunteer for extra work, like we talked about, volunteer to be on committees, but in those things, be able to communicate the specific skills you've learned and developed and how that shows you're ready for the next job. So if you want to be a manager, think about what kinds of tasks does a manager need to do. They need to be able to develop their team. They need to be able to discipline their team. So you need to find opportunities where you can do similar work that shows that you can take on at least half of that job. especially if you're looking at a promotion. You need to demonstrate that you have the core skills to do half of that job now, and it starts with relationships with your boss and learning how to develop those things. So we're kind of coming full circle there.
All right, let's dive back into this question.
Hershey Trividi here on the panel in Daytona Beach, Florida. What is the main difference of a business owner as a leader as to contrast a position of an upper-level manager in an organization?
Great one. Nigel?
It's down to how many hats people have to wear and how you learn to wear different hats. If you are a small business and there's maybe just a few of you, then the owner will probably have a particular skill they're better at sales or management or organization or something. But they will wear many other hats and they will have many, many different roles. As you end up in a much larger organization, there's increased specialization. And so having all those different skills is useful, but chances are at any one time, you're only doing something more vertical, more specialist. And learning to use those around you and engage others around you, even if you could do the job better, because that's part of their role, is part of working in a much larger organization. And some people have that ability and some don't. And, you know, I work for a company where we acquire small businesses and merge them in. And I would tell you on the whole, about a third of those previous entrepreneurs integrate very easily. About a third never can, and a third will do with some guidance.
And Bill?
Yeah, that's exactly the same word I was going to use. You know, if you're entrepreneurial, you kind of figure it out early in your life, and you don't, you know, you feel like you can probably do enough of everything okay to keep the organization you're building going. But you find out over the course of time that you're going to have to take one of two paths. Either you're going to have to make your business bigger, you're going to add more people. And if you do that and your name is on the door, you're going to do less of what motivated and made you passionate about what you do, and you're going to spend more time in just management of people, management of systems, working on finances and all the rest of that. And so you get to these forks in the road where, you know, do you want to go bigger and do more of that? Do you want to sit in more meetings, more board meetings? You want to talk to bankers? Or are you really passionate about your creative field or your structural field or whatever it is, and you want to spend your life understanding and analyzing and doing that? And it's been a constant battle for me my whole life. Every time I've had an opportunity to go bigger, and I found myself in hours and hours of meetings, eventually it just wears on me. And it's like, is this really what I want my life to be? I actually want to, you know, turn on the tape recorders and do something creative, or I will get frustrated. If I don't write something today, I'm going to be upset. And I haven't had time to write something in 2 weeks because of all this management stuff that I found myself having to do. So you just got to figure out where you fit. It's important to be a happy person, and that means happy is how well you fit with what you need.
And on to our next and final question.
Kyle Hammond in Chicago, Illinois. Any tips on succession planning in a volunteer organization when turnover happens ad hoc?
And Jon?
If you are a manager, one of your core responsibilities is succession planning. And if you're failing to do that, you're failing your team, you're failing your organization. So my recommendation is, on a quarterly basis, think through everyone who reports to you and ask yourself, are they ready for their next step in their career or even their voluntary career? Because voluntary careers can have career progression too. You might start by setting up the chairs or cleaning up the table afterwards, and then that grows you into running the soundboard, which grows you into leading a class or something like that. So think through some of the tasks and how you can naturally grow people. Identify those people in the volunteer organization and what their goals and passions are, and connect their passion to something that challenges them. And I'm saying this as someone who's led the largest volunteer event for our church when I worked at the church. And it was really about giving ownership to people and encouraging and challenging them to take it and run with it. And recognizing that they're not going to be here forever, and that's okay. Just make sure you have the next person ready and prepared to take over that position. That's what succession planning is making sure there's someone to step in if someone leaves.
Jon, thank you so much for bringing this conversation to the office hours community. I want to give you the last word to wrap this up.
My last word is, it's not super difficult but it takes a lot of work to be able to prepare yourself for the next job. If you do these few small things, you'll increase your chances exponentially to take that next step in your career that you want and you're ready for. But you do have to show that you're ready for it. You have to build the relationships you want, and you have to do the work already. So do those 3 things, and I promise you, you'll do much better at your next step.
Relationships, communication, and results. Thank you again, Jon. Thank you to our producers for always wonderful conversations happening in the chat and for your questions. To our panel, thank you for sharing your insights, expertise, and your stories. And of course, to our production team, for whom, without which this could not be possible. Thank you so much. Be sure, if you want to find out what's happening the rest of the week here on Office Hours, head over to officehours.global. Remember, we do have after hours, which is where we spend time talking, doing checks, testing things out. So head over to officehours.global so that you can get access to that part of the community. Thank you all so much, and we will see you next time. Bye. And this is where we start whispering. Great advice, Jon. Thank you so much for bringing this to the community.
Good hour, Jon. Thanks.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
You should do it again.
It was our pleasure.
Panel.
Let's traverse. How many times are we going to traverse? Let's go. How many miles?
And yes, we hit it on the dot. So happy about that. Small win. Small big win.
Yes. But I hope you stay in this position a long time.
Oh, but according to Jon, I need to work my way out of this position.
Don't.
I didn't say that.
Don't.
You can't be too